when we saw Earth from space, like the Apollo 8 image of Earth just hanging like this beautiful ornament in the blackness of space, we saw it as a globe, a world with no borders that we could see. We realized the frontier is no longer on Earth. The frontier now is in space.
Hi, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, you get my conversations with peak-performing thought leaders, creatives, and entrepreneurs. Every week, I bring you the latest scoop on what these incredible people do to succeed and how you can get their secrets and do it too. Whether we're talking about best practices for spending time creating, how to work the business part of your business, or how to keep in that innovative mindset so you can keep living and performing, you'll get practical and wise information to use in your work and in your life. And now, let's get on with the show. Hey there, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I'm your host, and I'm super happy that you're here. I'm also incredibly happy to have Leslie Mullen on the show today. There are a couple of reasons that I'm super happy. First of all, she's fabulous, but also because she's a NASA person. And you know me, I'm a NASA dork. I've had Beth Mund, who's the former communications officer for the International Space Station, on the show, and various other people from NASA over the years. I'm really excited that Leslie's here. Let me tell you about her. Leslie is the writer, producer, and host of the NASA JPL podcast, On a Mission. And if you don't know what JPL is, the Jet Propulsion Lab, she's been a science journalist for over 20 years and previously was a producer for Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk podcast and TV show, another one of my favorites. I'm so excited to welcome you, Leslie. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
There are so many questions. First of all, how did you get started in looking at science journalism as the thing you wanted to do? What excited you about the topic that you were like, this is the thing for me?
National Geographic. 100%.
Ah.
Yeah, I loved, I have a background in photography.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was drawn into the magazine because of course, they're very famous photographers, right?
Sure.
And I actually, when I was in college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I went to a dinner where one of the senior vice presidents of National Geographic gave the keynote. And I went up to him and I said, I want to work for you someday. And he's like, oh, you're going to take my job.
I love it.
And I was like, no. I just want to work for National Geographic, which ended up happening in a really weird way for a very short time. But that's kind of a long story.
Wow. Okay. So what I didn't tell you when we were getting to know each other a few minutes ago was before I worked at NASA, I worked at the National Geographic. Where did you work? Did you 17th Street Building or M Street Building?
No, I didn't work for them directly. So what happened was when I was producing the Star Talk radio podcast, Neil was doing Cosmos on Fox,
mm-hmm.
and Fox owns the National Geographic channel. And so through that sort of relationship, they developed the Star Talk TV show for National Geographic.
Mm-hmm.
So for one season of Star Talk, I worked for National Geographic by doing the Star Talk podcast.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I worked at National Geographic for 4 years in the early 90s. I was about to start playing the name game with you, and that's probably not the greatest idea here on the podcast. So let's move on. So the National Geographic, and it was the photographs. So talk to me about photography. I love that you have such a varied background. What about photography is a passion for you? What do you love about it most?
So when I was in graduate school, I did my master's thesis on photography and how that image is so kind of enshrined in our society as evidence of truth
mm-hmm.
and proof of all sorts of things, but it can be manipulated.
Sure.
At the same time, either through the photographer's eye or through the post kind of production of the photo,
mm-hmm.
which doesn't necessarily mean it's a lie. It's still a truth mediated through an artist's eye, which is true for painting or any sort of art form. You can say that they show a false sense of reality in order to uncover deeper truths about our lives and society. And so I sort of love the philosophical aspect of photography, but I also just think there's something so magical about that frozen moment in time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's just something about people's faces and actions and the framing of it. But I also, I love films too, like basically moving pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think there's something we're visual creatures, and there's something just so powerful and artistic and deeply meaningful that photography captures for me.
I love that you said that about capturing a moment in time. That to me is the ultimate point of photography, if you will, is that that moment will probably never happen again quite the same way. Even if you try,
Yeah.
you won't be able
Well,
to
people have
replicate
tried
it.
to, well, people have tried, right? Like people have tried to replicate the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima, and like there's all sorts of like parodies of different photographic moments in time, but it's just a copy, right? Like it doesn't have the same power as the original image.
Sure. And there's something, like you said, about the eye of the person, the eye of the creative person who's taking the photo. I'm all about everybody being creative and having your creative genius. So how you would take a scene, a photograph of a scene, is not at all the way I would, is not at all the way just about anybody else would, even if we were trying to replicate one another. And there's something about that unique individual perspective that I think is so incredibly fascinating. And I love the National Geographic for that reason too. And so when you do that, when you are bringing your unique creative sensibility to a project, a photograph, what do you think that you're drawing on? Where is that coming from? That, oh, my creative perspective, my unique way of looking at subject X. Where do you think it comes from? How do you utilize it?
I think probably the strongest is just a deep sense of curiosity, which is what I think every human being has.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that, you see it in kids, right? Like they're just curious about everything. And then as they get older, I don't know, I guess we lose some of our curiosity sometimes
Hmm.
because we get caught up in life and we don't have time. But I do think, especially when it comes to science and science podcasting, I do think we still have it. I just think in the course of learning about the world, it becomes really complicated at a certain point in our schooling. And nobody likes to be made to feel that they're dumb or that they just can't get it. And I think the way school is structured is once you fall behind, you can't catch up, right? And then you just feel dumber and dumber. And then you just sort of like, well, I'm not good at that. So I'm just not going to pay attention to that anymore and focus on stuff I am good at,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which I think is a completely understandable viewpoint. But I think our curiosity about the world around us never goes away. So I think it's really important for people whose job it is to share this sort of information. It's our job to make sure it's presented in a way that people feel like, oh, wow, I get that. Like that speaks to me. I don't feel dumb, like I feel like I learned something. I feel smarter. So I kind of think when it comes to podcasts or books or films, I'm not saying we need to cater to the lowest common denominator, but I do think it's not always the fault of the audience when you don't get it. I think the creator sort of has an obligation to find ways to reach the audience.
Oh, I agree completely. When I worked at NASA, I was a science educator. That's what I did in earth science. And I got to teach soils. And whenever I came in, people would go, oh, yeah, that's dirt. And so I had to come up with fun and exciting ways to teach this otherwise really dry topic and make it fun, make it exciting, make it compelling. And so for me, I always went to what was relevant to the people I was teaching. So we started with, for example, what did you have for breakfast today? Oh, you had pancakes. Well, where do pancakes come from? And then we would relate it back to wheat, and wheat being something that grows in the soil, etc. So when you develop your podcasting topics, when you're writing the scripts, when you're deciding on the subjects, What is the process? Like you said, oh, I want to make it something that makes people feel like they've learned something. What's the process of developing those subject matters that you're going to talk about, and how do you approach that relevance angle, if you even do?
Well, I think that's something that NASA does struggle with sometimes, the relevance angle. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, you had to find a way to make your lessons relevant for the people you're telling them to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the pancake example. Everybody has pancakes. Everybody loves pancakes. Like, what is the magic of pancakes?
Right.
Um, but it is important to find a way to be relevant to people's lives. And that's something that sort of led me to do my second season of the podcast, which was asteroids, because I feel like asteroid impacts are something people are concerned about. You know, they ended the dinosaurs. Maybe a bad asteroid could hit us someday. You always hear these headlines, right? Oh my God, an asteroid is coming for Earth. We're all doomed. Never mind, it missed, you know?
Right.
There's
It
a
was
lot of, yeah,
50,000 miles away or something, right?
yeah. Yeah, there's a couple newspapers that are especially guilty of that. I did a little research during that season just to see which newspapers were sort of the culprits of the scary headlines, and there were two that basically put out a headline almost every single day about a dangerous asteroid.
So,
Um,
so they're alarmist in nature, in other words. Uh,
yeah, when you actually read the story, usually they're not 100% accurate, but they're at least try to give good information. But it's
mhm.
the headline that's super misleading.
Right.
Um, so the relevance led my season two, but then as I got into asteroids, you kind of move away from, well, how does this affect me, and more into the curiosity aspect of it. Like,
Hmm.
oh, isn't it so cool that this is how the universe is constructed or the solar system? Like, why are there asteroids out there in the first place? And so I don't think every single story has to be 100% relevant to everybody's lives, because I do think you can have both the relevance and the curiosity seekers.
Sure, absolutely. And the thing is, to me, relevance often sparks curiosity, so it gets them there anyway. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
either your audience starts curious, or their curiosity is sparked because you've hit on something that's relevant.
Hmm.
So when you were doing your asteroids season, what was the biggest thing that you found that was interesting to your listeners?
Um, it's hard to say because I feel like everybody gets something different. So the way the On a Mission podcast is structured, it's sort of like a book where
Mm-hmm.
every episode is a chapter in that book. So in the book about asteroids, one of the chapters was about, you know, how does the government and NASA prepare for an incoming asteroid,
Mm-hmm.
which is really fascinating, I think, because it touches on things like nuclear treaties and things like that. And then there's another chapter in the book that's just, oh, the Dawn mission went to go visit the biggest asteroid in the asteroid belt series. You know, well, that doesn't really affect me, but it's kind of cool, you know?
Yeah, sure,
They
sure.
use ion propulsion like out of Star Trek. And I guess I've heard from people who listen to that series, and also the current series, which is about planet Earth, which is perhaps the most relevant series I've ever done,
Yay.
because everybody lives on Earth. But everybody gets something different. And that's sort of surprising to me, because I'm like, oh, this is the best episode, clearly, because I love it. There's so many cool things. And then people are like, you know, I listened to your season and I really love this. And I'd be like, really? That? So you can never really predict what people are going to take away from it. So I focus more on how can I tell a really compelling story in a gripping way, in a fun way, in an easy to understand way, and then, you know, let people choose their favorites.
I love that. I love that you're like, here it is. This is cool. And then the audience gets to choose what's cool about it for them. So you said this current season is about the Earth. And for, as I said, I was a NASA environmental educator about the Earth for 20 plus years. So I'm an Earth dork. And yet people often say to me, wait a minute, you worked at NASA and you're studying the Earth? Why? I thought NASA studied space.
Yeah.
How does your audience and how do you work through that misconception?
Well, that's something I said in the very first episode was like when most people think of NASA, they think of galaxies and astronauts and, you know, stars, whatever, other planets, not Earth, but NASA has more missions studying Earth than any other planet in the solar system. So I kind of just went head on with that, sort of that misconception. And I think it's funny people's perspective of NASA. Like if you ask people how much percentage of the federal budget is spent on NASA, people usually say, I don't know, 20%, because NASA has such a big footprint when it comes to public outreach,
Sure.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You're always hearing about a new mission or an astronaut visiting the ISS or, oh gosh, we found this cool thing out about Mars or Venus or Jupiter. And so it seems because you're always hearing news from NASA, we must be spending a ton of money to do all this. But when they find out it's actually less than 1% of the budget, people are just like, huh, how is that even possible? So I think the same goes for Earth. Like there's so many NASA findings about our planet, like all these satellites orbiting, some of them are NASA satellites, and they're studying our planet. And I think people just don't make that connection. I don't know, maybe it's because the Earth headlines just don't make as much noise um, in the media or in social media as the kind of more far out stuff does.
Yeah, I could see that. We've always, I mean, I don't know any little kid who didn't lie down on the ground at one point in the evening and look up at the stars and wonder where those things were, So it's
And I
something
also
that's far
think,
away.
yeah, I also think maybe part of it too might be the fact that people think of NASA as the frontier, right? Like NASA pushes that frontier, you know, the first man on the moon, and hopefully soon the first people on Mars. Like NASA's always pushing outward. And
Hmm.
so the idea that we'd be looking inward to our own planet, it just doesn't seem like that's part of NASA's mission, even though it very much is.
Absolutely. And the way I used to talk about it as well, NASA studies the planets. There's a whole thing called planetary science, and the Earth is a planet. So it's good to know about where we live. In part, that's what one of the things that I remember the scientists talking about, the comparative planetologists that I talked to when I worked at Goddard, and they
Yeah.
they were talking about how studying the other planets helped them learn about our planet in
Hmm.
relationship, so it's a broad reach as far as being able to know more. And when you're talking about this, when you're talking about the Earth and the many missions through JPL, through NASA headquarters, Goddard Space Flight Center, Wallops, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many different centers that we could be talking about. When you're talking about the Earth, and you want to break a story, for example, and I don't know what the construction of your podcast is. It sounds like you have a season's worth of material that you're then doing episodes on. But if something happens in the middle that's really exciting that you want to talk about, how does that work within the structure of the podcast that you're doing?
Yeah, I don't really do breaking news in this podcast because it is sort of an evergreen product. And
Mm,
so I'm
mm-hmm,
not trying to like make sure I have the very latest on this particular aspect of earth science or whatever. As I'm writing it, if there are new discoveries and they're relevant to what I'm writing about, I'll certainly include it if that makes sense. But I'm not chasing the news.
mm-hmm.
I'm more trying to give a perspective view because I feel like there's plenty of podcasts out there that are all about what's the latest findings. You have all these different like Science Friday, like, you know, here's the latest in the science headlines. And one of my thoughts about this podcast was there wasn't really a podcast that gave people some perspective on different fields of study that allows them to take that news and put it in its proper context, you know? And so that's what I wanted to do with this. I wanted to be like, oh, you see all these headlines, but what does it really mean? How important are they? Where do they fit in this sort of giant puzzle piece of our existence that scientists are currently putting together? And when it comes to comparative planetology, like for the Earth season, I mean, I feel like that's so important because that was sort of how this season was structured. It wasn't just, oh, like here's all the different aspects of Earth. It was look at Earth as a planet in space, you know? And what does that mean? And what are all these systems on our planet that work together, either in harmony or not, to make it the world that we live in today? And I feel like that is the benefit of NASA, is to kind of step back a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and put us in our proper context in the solar system, in the galaxy, in the universe, and say, you know, I know you're very focused on your life and all the news headlines coming out, but it's sort of like more of a historian's perspective in a way,
Mm-hmm.
is to be like, okay, let's take a little step back and kind of get a different cosmic perspective of what all this is and what it means.
It's so interesting. My husband talks about how one of the things that he loves to imagine is how small we are. You know,
Mm,
people and the earth and then our sun, and you compare our sun to a red giant, and you compare a red giant to a blue giant, and this, by that I mean, you know, blue giant stars, and we're minuscule. We're barely there. We're barely a speck compared to some of the huge
mm,
objects in the galaxy and in the universe.
right.
And so that relationship is so interesting, and yet I come back to that idea of relevance. It's like, okay, if I look at my thoughts on the stars and my place in the galaxy, my place in the universe, does it ever make you feel, I don't know, awe-inspired? How do you feel about that when you yourself are going, yeah, wow, we're small
Yeah.
compared to the rest? What are your feelings on that?
Well, it's funny because the final episode of the third season was about the Voyager mission, where we
Mm-hmm.
saw Earth as a pale blue dot
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
the vast darkness of space, which Carl Sagan had that beautiful soliloquy about, you know, this mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Um, and the reason I did the final episode as that was because the first episode of the season was looking at Earth from the International Space Station.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do astronauts see when they go up there, and how does that change their perspective of our planet? And then all the episodes in the middle were, oh, sorry, motorcycle. All the episodes in the middle were um, different aspects of the planet. And then at the end, we go way out and we see it as far away as the farthest man made, human made object has ever gone.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's humbling, right? Because I know I've heard from people that that perspective of our planet really terrifies them, and it depresses them. And other people see that same picture and feel awe inspired and, oh my God, we're so special to have life in this vibrant world in an empty universe. Like, we need to cherish it because it is so special and unique. And so I guess you can balance both those feelings, because I think that's what Carl Sagan did in his book about it. Was, you know, we are alone out here as far as we know, and no
Mm-hmm.
one's going to come save us. And so we need to treasure our planet and each other and work together rather than trying to tear each other down. And so it's appreciating the beauty and splendor of our planet, but it's also acknowledging the fact that we are teeny tiny and completely alone.
I'm taking a second because, yeah, absolutely. Carl Sagan is another one of my heroes, and his perspective on it being that because we're alone, because this is all we have, we need to take care of it is so spot on. And so when you're working on these episodes, which, you know, I now I'll admit I listened to the first season, but I did not listen to the third season, and now of course I have to go listen to the whole thing.
You have
Uh,
to.
yeah, absolutely. But when you're doing it, you know, it's such a an awesome responsibility of
Hmm.
bringing that across. I'm so excited that you took it on. And yet when you're there, when you're in the thick of making these episodes, some people might get, as you said, depressed. Some people might get it right away. Some people might think it's too dry. Some people might think it's boring. What what's your process for making these topics cool and exciting? What do
Yeah.
you
Well,
do?
so you have the science, which can be dry, and scientists can be very dry because they're trained in a certain language to speak to each other, just like
Hmm.
doctors are, right? I mean, they all have PhDs, so I guess they're doctors too. But so in some ways, I'm an interpreter,
Hmm.
but that can be really dry and boring. And so the way the episodes are structured is to allow the scientists to speak, but also I'm there interpreting what they say and sort of, guiding you by the hand through this journey as the narrator. And I think every episode, well, not every episode, but almost every episode has the scientists' personal stories as well,
Hmm.
any challenges that they've had to overcome or unexpected deviations in their life. Or some of these scientists have life stories that just blow me. I think my favorite one, well, I shouldn't say that because they're all pretty amazing, but there was one that always I think about a lot is a scientist who grew up in India and his determination to become an asteroid scientist. I mean, they need to make a Hollywood movie out of it. It's
Hmm.
incredible. Just the odds he had to overcome. Oh my goodness. And the strange the people who helped him along his way, the strange sort of relationships and coincidences that happened. It's just incredible. And it's better than fiction. And so I think the personal stories are one way that people can feel a connection and also show that scientists aren't these like stiff ivory tower lab coated humanoid like creatures. They're actual like human beings with like
Right.
really interesting lives and they feel sad and they feel happy and they have failures and they have to struggle. It's like you do. It's important to present scientists in that way because Hollywood does them any favors largely. And I also often use a lot of pop culture podcasts. I try not to go overboard with that, but sometimes I get a little carried away because, like I said, I love movies, I love pop culture. I feel like pop culture is an artistic sort of take on society.
Hmm.
And the connections, because these are human beings doing science, there's always pop culture connections.
Sure.
And so, like one scientist I interviewed for my episode about fire and its role in Earth ecosystems, like the scientist who takes up most of the episode, she feels like her life is some ways defined by fire. Like she's like, I'm an Aries, which is a fire sign. Like her husband is a film composer, and when right before they met, he was composing Stravinsky's Firebird Suite. She's just like, why are all these fire things in my life? I was
Wow.
just like, yeah, it's there's all sorts of ways to make it fun, like little movie references, TV show references, music references. I had somebody write to me and say that the episode I did about the DART mission to the asteroid Didymos, it has it's a double asteroid actually. It's a big asteroid and then kind of a little asteroid orbits it like a little moon. And the scientists have nicknamed that little moon the Diddy Moon. And so I had to put a P Diddy song in there. Like it asked for it, and the song I found was "Going Around the World."
I love it.
Yeah, and somebody wrote to me and like, "Oh, I love that so much."
That's terrific. Yeah, and it's so funny to me how for lack of a better example, because I don't know that there is one. Star Trek has
Mm,
influenced science a lot. I've
absolutely.
I've read that the communicator in the original series was also the thing that inspired the flip phone. And so the person who invented the actual flip phone had been a Star Trek fan. So when you do those pop cultural references, first of all, it sounds like a lot of fun, but how do you plan that? Do you just go, oh, I got inspired to add the P. Diddy song, or is there
Yeah,
something
it just happens organically, like
I
as
love
I'm
it.
writing. Yeah, I'm just like, oh, Diddy Moon, that's funny. That reminds me of P. Diddy. I wonder if P. Diddy has a song that's sort of astronomical. Let me look that up, and then just put in like a short little sample of it.
I love that. And the reason I love it is because it's one of the things that I know people who would like to be more creative but aren't as creative as they'd like to be struggle with is
Mhm.
permission to make those associations, like giving themselves permission to draw on what they know or what they're curious about. And it sounds like you just do that. You're like, oh, it's organic. I went, oh, wait, let me put A to B and B to C and then find this P. Diddy song that's,
Mm.
going around the world. Have you always given yourself permission to follow that, or did you have to do some work around, I'm gonna be innovative on this and I'm gonna make those connections? How did that happen for you?
Well, it's sort of a two-tier question because when I first started putting together the podcast, I wasn't sure NASA would let me do things like this
Mm-hmm.
because, NASA is a source of information and there's not a lot of play in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I give JPL a ton of credit for letting me just be very creative in that way and celebrating that. So that was a relief for me because it makes it, like you said, more fun, right?
Absolutely.
Um, but in terms of my own creativity, I guess it's just um, I don't know. So when I worked as a producer on the Star Talk podcast, that was a pop culture comedy podcast. And
Mm-hmm.
so I guess in a way I was able to kind of play around in that playground for a while and it just became part of my process. And so I can't really like mark one moment where I'm like, aha, this is how I'm creative. It's just
Mm-hmm.
sort of, I've done a lot of different things, working in radio, working in TV, working online as a science journalist. Like they're all together. It's like when people say, why do I have to study this in school? I'm never going to use it in my life. And the answer to that is always you never know what you're going to use and when
Right.
you're going to use it, right? So I think creativity draws from everything that you sort of take in, all that input, and then your brain sort of processes it all together and makes associations and connections. That's why I think a lot of artists and writers, when they feel stuck, they kind of put it away and just go read a book or go for walks or go
Right.
watch a movie or whatever because your brain needs time to make those associations. That's why a lot of people are really into meditation because it allows you to kind of cast aside all your concerns and just open your mind and just let it kind of work for a little while just without a lot of input
Right.
and
Without
make those
direction.
associations for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, so I think when it comes to creativity, it's important to not focus too much on what you're doing and to allow your brain a little bit of play and a little bit of downtime.
You're singing my song. You are. I love it. Yeah, I absolutely. Because no, seriously,
Yeah,
Leslie, it's so important when we're in that
it is.
situation of creating to allow ourselves room to create instead of being
Mm,
so directed about it. And I find what you're doing
yeah.
so incredibly exciting because of that, because you're allowing yourself that process. And JPL for going, yes, absolutely, this, let's make this as fun and accessible as possible, which I think is great.
Mhm.
But that brings me to the next question. Do you meditate?
I do actually.
Yay. All right.
Actually, so we're in this COVID era right now, and I live in Los Angeles, and um, Los Angeles County provided a free meditation app for everybody who lives here so we can
Wow.
get through COVID better. So I've been playing around with that. And yeah, I think meditation is really an undervalued thing in Western society because, we're so focused on work, 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 right? And it's almost mechanized in a way. Like everybody has to put in X amount of hours and get X amount of productivity out of it and all that. But I do think there's a lot of value in I don't know, Eastern philosophies and meditation and allowing yourself to become bored, which nowadays everybody has their cell phones and you always have to be input, input, input. But I
Right.
think, the brain didn't evolve that way.
Right.
We need to allow ourselves time to um, not be connected all the time and
Oh,
just
so true.
let the brain go on like the low mode.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's funny. I teach a workshop. I go into companies and organizations and I teach a workshop called The Mindful Creative. And it's all about
Mm.
combining that mindful meditative sort of aspect with innovation and creativity. So that's why I'm like, you're singing my song. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
meditation is wonderful. And if you don't mind sharing, I know you said you follow the app. What is your meditation practice? Do you do like first thing in the morning, after work, before you go to sleep? How do you do that?
I'm what you call a meditative walker.
Mm, mm-hmm,
So I every day I go for a walk and I let my mind just kind of not think of anything. And because to me walking is there's a rhythm to it,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
There's a pacing and there's just you're away from your home, you're out in the world, the sky is above you, and it's just that sort of pacing of the walk. It's almost like the pendulum swinging back and forth in a way.
mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
very hypnotic in some ways,
Sure.
and that's probably my most meditative state is when I go for my walks.
Yeah, my husband and I used to have dogs, and walking the dog, we lived in the woods at the time in Greenbelt,
Mm.
Maryland, right near Goddard. That was my meditation for a long time, was walking my dog in the woods. And there's something very powerful about that. I'm so glad that we're talking about this because it is, I think, necessary, at least for me nowadays, to meditate because otherwise my brain is too busy. It's too stimulated, and
Mhm.
I don't get to, I don't get to be as creative because I'm too busy dealing with the hyperstimulation of everything.
Mhm.
So when you're in that state, when you're in that meditative state, do you just sort of let everything wash over you, or do you set an intention before you start?
It's more about I feel like sometimes my brain is doing like gymnastic exercises. There's so much stimulation, and
Sure.
it's sort of just about letting all that mental stimulation just kind of fade away, to
Mm-hmm.
just kind of unspool. And so I don't really say, today I'm going to meditate about this. It's more just about letting the mind kind of empty and then seeing what pops back in on its own.
Mm.
And I've
And
heard different people talk about this, and they've said that things like I would never have been able to write this book or write this song or whatever if I hadn't meditated, because that emptying of the mind and then allowing your brain to start making those connections and just let random thoughts come in uncontrolled are are the sources of inspiration for a lot of people.
absolutely. And it's a moment also to fill the well, to
Mhm.
let things empty out so that new and potentially really, really amazing things can sort of float in. And then you
Exactly.
have the next idea for the book or the next. Yeah, I've written 6 books and I'm working on the seventh right now. And I completely agree. I would not have done any of them without a meditative practice. So I want to, Shiv, I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's, to me, it's an important aspect of being alive is that time and repose, if you will, or contemplation time. What if we switch topics to the podcast again? I would love to know. I know it's you're covering, to me, very exciting topics, but what about the topics that you're covering is the most exciting to you, and also, what topics are you most excited about covering next? Like, what, if you can tease anything about the next season,
Mm.
I'd love to know.
I guess the most exciting things for me is just talking to the scientists and finding out their stories. I mean, I've been surprised by them by so many times. Like you think you know somebody, and then all of a sudden they reveal a part of themselves that you'd never heard about, or an aspect of their work that's just like, you excuse me, you did what? You know, I just find I find people really fascinating and generally lovely people, you know, and I just love hearing their stories, and I love that they give me the trust to share their stories.
Mm-hmm.
So that really excites me. For the next season, I'm hoping to go back to Mars. So NASA has a mission, another rover landing on Mars in February,
Mm-hmm.
called Perseverance, which we really needed this year.
Absolutely.
And so and we already have a rover on Mars called Curiosity, which at the top of this podcast I talked about. So I want to do a season talking about those missions and those scientists and how hard it is. I mean, I talked about this in season 1 about the difficulty of going to Mars, but I want to dig in even more into that because I do think Mars is our frontier right now for human exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be good to talk about Mars not only in terms of what's currently going on, but the challenges for the future.
Absolutely. And I have a friend who is on the short list of the people who, if they ever actually get people to Mars, she's a doctor and she's on the short list to go to Mars as one of the medical personnel. And I find that incredibly fascinating that if that ever happens, they could be looking at the Earth and the sun from another planet. It blows my mind. So when you're, sorry, hold on 1 second. I need to clear my throat and I don't want everybody to hear that. So give me a sec. Sing a song or something, Leslie. Sing a song.
Oh, you do not want me singing. I do not have a singing voice.
Oh, I see. I take stuff like that as a challenge. I would
Oh,
absolutely,
no.
I would love to teach you how to sing. That's one of the things I've
Oh,
done during my time is I'm a singer and I've taught many people who have said, oh, I can't sing. I can't carry a tune in a paper bag. And I've gotten them so that they are now sing with opera companies. So it's
oh my
possible.
goodness. Wow. That
So,
impresses me. I would love to learn more.
oh yeah, well, we'll talk about that offline.
Okay.
I would be happy to give you a quick lesson sometime on Zoom. We get to do that on Zoom nowadays. That's how I teach all my students. So
Okay.
so when you're doing that, when you're thinking about what is the future for your podcast, for NASA, you said Mars, you want to tackle that, and you said I heard you say that it's about the challenges, but there's also amazing successes. You know, being
Mhm.
able to be like some of the images and some of the data that Curiosity has sent back are just incredible. And so when you think about how that relates to people, how that relates to the average person or your audience, what do you think they get out of hearing some of that information of out of hearing those episodes and going, wow, this is what's happening in this agency that's doing this work?
Well, it's interesting. I was just talking to a friend of mine about the movie Interstellar, and I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the kind of suppositions put forth in that movie is that human beings are essentially explorers. We're not caretakers,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't necessarily agree with. I think we can be both. But I do think that exploration is a fundamental aspect of being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And I think are inspired by that. And I was also listening to a podcast about the mythology of Star Wars because I'm really fascinated.
Right there with you.
Noting in that episode, yeah, I mean, who doesn't love Star Wars? But they were noting in that podcast that when we saw Earth from space, like the Apollo 8 image um, of Earth just hanging like this beautiful ornament in the blackness of space, we saw it as a globe, a world with no borders that we could see. We realized the frontier is no longer on Earth. The frontier now is in space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't remember why I was talking about this, but that was what I was trying to say.
Well, you were talking about Star Wars and we were talking about making everything
Oh,
cool.
yeah. Why are people interested in something like Mars, basically? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think people are excited by the frontier. That's that's where you get a lot of Hollywood creativity and play in that area. You know, the Wild West used to be the frontier, but now space is the Wild West in a way. And Star Wars is all about that, right? Like the hive of scum and villainy. Like that's like a cantina from the Wild West, you know?
Absolutely.
So
Mos
yeah,
Eisley is a place you'd want to go only if you have a blaster or a lightsaber. I get it
yeah,
completely.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
when we're talking about this, it's I guess it makes us wonder. You know, it makes us think about possibilities when we're seeing movies and hearing podcasts about space, about Earth, about the frontier, about exploration. I think it awakens something in people. It certainly did in me when I first saw Star Trek and Star Wars, that idea of what you were talking about, being explorers. And within that, and I love what you said about both explorers and stewards, you know, caretakers.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
absolutely we can be both. The question that I have about the podcast, about On a Mission, is what part do you think On a Mission plays in encouraging both of those facets of the way people work, both the explorers and also the caretakers or the stewards?
Well, I guess I feel the role of On a Mission is to tell the story of the scientists, not only because they're just amazing stories that people should hear, but also because I hope it inspires people to want to learn more and become active participants in
Mm-hmm.
science.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes exploration, that includes caretaking of our own world. You know, how can you care for our world if you don't understand how it works? You know, you can't just walk into a room and say, I take care of you now. You know, like you have to understand it first. And so, yeah, I guess I hope the role of On a Mission is to get people more engaged in both aspects, the exploration and the caretaking that science works in. Because I
And
feel like an engaged audience is an audience that doesn't just want to hear the stories, they become part of the story too.
I feel like I want to just go and scene. Yeah, absolutely. That was exactly. I agree with you
Yeah.
completely that if we as storytellers, and I think it's all storytelling, if we as storytellers engage and inspire audiences, that's what it's all about. That's when we can make amazing discoveries and explore incredible new vistas and new frontiers. When you're doing this, when you're creating an episode, at one point earlier you said that you script things, and so I'm
Hmm.
wondering, when you script it, how different is creating a podcast episode for you from writing a story, from doing a more sort of, I guess, newspaper journalism style of story? What are the differences and how do you approach it?
Well, I'd say the biggest difference between writing a news story and doing a podcast episode is you have a lot more space to hear people speak. A newspaper story, you'll just get short little sound bites. You
Mm,
don't get like entire paragraphs, right? And it's more like documentary filmmaking, podcasting,
mm,
right? Because you're seeing people speak at length and you're following people around, and you're also, in podcasting, you're trying to engage people in the audience of the mind through sound. And so it's amazing how evocative little sounds can be in people's imaginations to build that world in their mind. You know, you don't need a lot of sound for people to suddenly be immersed in a story, but sound is very, very powerful. You know, it's one of the primal senses, and um, you can definitely overdo it. So you have to, it's like composing music in a way. There's a pace to podcasting. There's um, sort of art to which sounds you include. I remember I once got into a discussion with another podcaster about when it's appropriate to use sounds and when it's just cheesy.
mm, mm-hmm.
And so I don't know that that's a clearly defined line. And it's something that I definitely kind of reconsider as I'm building these. Like, did I go too much? Did I put too much here? Should I take out some? Did I not put enough? It's so in a way that's sort of like composing music. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like writing is needed for making the podcast episodes, but you're writing for another art form. And so it's sort of, it's kind of the skeleton of it, but it's not the meat on the bones, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. And as a podcast, obviously, as a podcaster myself, I find that getting the opportunity to talk to someone like you who is telling these incredible stories is exciting because it gives us, again, the chance to see how another part of the world works. I get the honor of talking with you, but also I get the honor of telling your story to the people who are listening, to the person who's listening to this. And so I would love to actually get the information on how somebody who wants to listen to On a Mission, where should they go to find the podcast?
Well, NASA actually has a lot of podcasts. I'm just one of many. So if you go to nasa.gov/podcasts, all of the podcasts that NASA produces are there, including
Great.
On a Mission. And also we're on SoundCloud. NASA has a SoundCloud channel with all of our podcasts as well. And Apple, of course, we have all of our podcasts on Apple. And I think we're currently trying to work across the NASA agency to make our kind of work together more, because people don't know this. You know this about NASA, but I think a lot of people don't know that NASA has a lot of different centers, and each center kind of is in a world unto themselves sometimes. So we're trying to work together more across NASA.
That's wonderful.
Especially, well, not just in the podcast production, but also in how we present the podcast to the audience, be more of a cohesive thing. And so, yeah, I would love for us to be on Spotify, but that takes time, I guess. And there's so many podcast platforms out there. I'm sure I'm on some that I didn't list.
Right. It's funny because Apple, the way some of the podcast platforms work is when Apple publishes a podcast, that podcast platform like Overcast goes, woo, great. And it grabs it. So now it's on Overcast without you having to do anything about it. It's just grabbed it. But so many of them, I know, for example, this podcast, it just got on Pandora after many months of waiting. So now you can actually listen to the podcast on Pandora, and you can listen to the podcast on Spotify, and you can listen to the podcast on Amazon Music or Amazon Podcasts. I'm not sure what it is, but you have to submit it all. And I think with NASA, it's got to go through all the official channels. So it's a little bit different than you going, oh, I have a podcast and I'm going to submit it. So it takes a little bit longer. Yeah. And NASA, it's funny, for having such a tiny amount of the national budget, it's a huge agency. It gets a lot done with not a whole lot of money, really. So
exactly.
All the centers. It is. And I worked at Goddard, but I did work with JPL and did work with headquarters and at Wallops for various projects. And all of you do incredible work. And I'm so thrilled that I got a chance to chat with you and get to know a little bit more about how you approach this amazing topic. I mean, for me, of course, I'm being a science nerd and especially an earth science nerd. I'm so grateful that you've taken this on and are doing such a lovely job of bringing these stories and the scientist stories out to everybody. And I wanted to ask, I have two more questions. The first question is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to be sure that you say?
Well, I would just say for the earth science season especially, there's so much more beyond what I was able to cover with the podcast. I mean, when you look at earth science, there's just so much research going on and so many amazing discoveries every year. And I hope that people who listen to the podcast at least are really interested in it and go on to explore for themselves more. Because I barely scratched the surface, honestly.
It's very true. I agree completely. No matter how much time you spend on it, there's such a wealth of exploration and research to be done just on our home planet. It's incredible how much there's going on all the time, and also how many new missions are going out to keep studying our home. And I think that's wonderful. So yes, keep learning, keep being curious, keep finding out more. That's fabulous. And before I give my last question, I want to say thank you, Leslie, for joining me. This has been such a lovely conversation, and I've gotten my NASA dork on, so I'm like, yay, that makes me that makes me very excited on top of everything else. So I really appreciate you being here. I wanted to ask the question that I ask everybody who comes on the show, and it's a silly question, but I find that it yields some really poignant answers. And the question is this: if you had a plane that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Wow. I guess that has to be just a one-word answer then.
It doesn't. It can be 2 or 3 words. Will you marry me? So that's 4. So
that's true.
You can have even 4 words.
Well, I just, I wish I could write Carl Sagan's soliloquy about the pale blue dot, honestly. I mean, I know it's long, but it just, if the audience listening to this episode hasn't heard that, they should Google it immediately and listen, because it's just as relevant today as it was when he first made it. And, it just speaks to the need for us to realize that we are one planet, one species, and we're not all going to get along all the time, but I would love for us to come together to try to work and build a better world.
That's beautiful and so true. So true. And what I will do is I will locate that soliloquy somewhere online, and I'll put it in the show notes so that
perfect.
if you want it, you'll be able to access it. And also, I have to say, I know you worked on the Neil deGrasse Tyson Cosmos, but the original Cosmos,
yeah,
with Carl Sagan.
On Cosmos. Yeah, I did.
No.
Yeah, the Cosmos show that Neil did was completely done by Fox. I had no involvement in that.
Okay. Well, you worked with Neil while he was doing it, I think you said.
Yes,
And to Cosmos, to me, that was life-changing. The original Cosmos was with Carl Sagan was life-changing. So that's why I put those connections together in my head, and I was hoping that you had worked on the Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson.
That would have been great, but yeah.
Maybe if and when he does the sequel, what's really funny is watching some of the things in the original Cosmos compared to the one that Neil deGrasse Tyson did. Some of the things we just didn't know in 1979. We had no idea. And some of the, definitively Neil deGrasse Tyson was able to go, oh yeah, and this is what it was. What Carl Sagan said it would be is this is what it was. And some things didn't end up that way, but it's really fascinating how we keep exploring and we keep striving. And I'm so glad that you are part of that conversation, Leslie. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing some of that excitement with me and my listeners.
Oh, it was a pleasure. And I really am happy about your enthusiasm on all these topics. And so it's really a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks so much. So this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and this is also the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I hope that you've enjoyed today's fabulous conversation with Leslie Mullins of the On a Mission podcast from JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab. I hope that you've enjoyed the episode. I hope that if you have enjoyed the episode, that you will get in touch with me and let me know what you thought and leave a review of the show, or if you decide not to leave a review, you can just give it the stars that you'd like it to have. Either way, any communication that we have enriches the show and hopefully will enrich your experience the next time you listen. Until that next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg saying, remember to listen, learn, laugh, and love a whole lot. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new. And if you like what you're hearing, please review it and rate it and let other people know. And if you'd like to be a sponsor of the show, I'd love to meet you on patreon.com/innovative mindset. I also have lots of exclusive goodies to share just with the show's supporters there. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2021. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, keep living in your innovative mindset.